getting people in. So, welcome everybody to our third installment of our virtual beef series with a focus on heifers this year. And so, we are really excited to be able to have a person that's going to answer every question that you have and put more money in your pocket guaranteed by the end of the night. And so you may lose money, but you'll put money in your pocket ultimately. So we're very privileged to have Dr. Andrew Griffith. He's a professor in the livestock economist for UT, and so Dr. Griffith has been a mainstay for our UT Extension program in the state, and we're very fortunate to have him here. And so I gave him the task of kind of giving us an outlook on the heifers. And so he's going to give us both perspective because that's the $1 million question is do we keep our heifers or do we sell them? Where's the value at? So Dr. Griffith, if you don't mind, take over. Thank
All
you
right,
again.
thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Matt told me I had 3.5 hours, and so I figured I'd utilize every second I had. But um, we jot down your questions as we go, or do something. I mean, I guess you could put them in the chat, but as I'm talking, I'm probably not going to check the chat. But if there's something that's really on your mind as we're going, I mean, please unmute yourself and ask the question there too. But I've I guess to give a quick background on myself so you understand some of my thought process. Uh, I run stocker cattle. I have a, about 120 mature beef cows that I breed, and I develop a few heifers every year. Some of those a lot of those for resale. There's some that'll go back into what I'm doing, but so we typically keep 500 and somewhere between 500 and 600 head a year that we turn. And I run some stocker heifers. I run some heifers for breeding as replacements. And so some of what I'm going to go over today really focuses on some of the things I think about when I'm making some of those decisions. And I think it provides a really good method that some people need to be a method that you might utilize to think through some of this same decision. So when I'm doing anything, I really want to know what my objective is. What's the end game to what we're trying to achieve? And from the heifer situation, what's probably the most common thing for most of our cow-calf producers in the state is to produce a crop of calves, sell all the males, hand select heifers, and then uh, sell the rest of the heifers and then try to develop the heifers that we retained based off of hand selection, whether that be what they look like, what their dam looked like, or how she's produced. Those types of things are, a lot of different things that people think about. Not that any of them are wrong or right, but that's kind of what we're looking at. So I think most people, and primarily the way I look at the business is my number one objective is to be profitable and try to maximize that profit. And in that, I have other sub goals or lower goals behind that. And so I make decisions based off of what will maximize my profit. And sometimes I make the right decision, sometimes I make the wrong decision. Um, but when we're thinking about heifers, right now, I know the market price has fell off just a little bit, but they're still very, very expensive. They're still very, very valuable. And sometimes, especially with aging producers, people that are getting older, that are thinking about slowing down, there's a lot of value in selling those heifers instead of retaining them. But even as a young producer, there might be value in selling them versus retaining them. So, here we are. We've set at record prices for cattle, and a lot of people are thinking about growing the herd. Can we grow the herd to make more money, or do we need to just keep steady? And so, what is your objective? Um, Again, I throw in here, do you have a plan to exit the cattle business in a few years? If you do, if you do have a plan to exit the cattle business, then your objectives may be a little different than other people's, and your mode of action and method of action and route will likely be different than those that are going to be in the business for the next 10 or 15 years. Um, Additionally, if you're a cow calf guy and you have heifers, or you could purchase heifers, or is there a new enterprise for you that might be fitting for your operation? And when I say that, heifer development is a enterprise. Backgrounding heifers for others to have a development program, that's an enterprise. I don't know what all people's different objectives are. I mean, I hit some of the high ones here, but I'm sure there's some other ones that are certainly there. Uh, Somebody asked me the other day why I keep stockers during a certain time period when I do, and I'm like, because I need to eat the grass. I need the grass gone. I mean, it keeps me from having to bush hog, this, that, or the other because of just having mouths out there eating. And so, even though I'm trying to maximize profit, there's all in that, I have less cost if I'm not out there having to bush hog. So that helps me maximize profit. So keeping grass eat down, especially this year, there's more grass than most people know what to do with this year. A producer, I guess I talked to him on Monday, and he said, we're doing something illogical. We're going out here to cut more hay, and we don't need any more hay. And this is a fellow that probably uses, oh, I'm going to bet 1,500 rolls a year or more, probably more. I mean, it's a wild guess. It's probably maybe 2,000 rolls a year. But he's saying, yeah, we're going to go out here and cut more hay. Um, and so, there's sometimes you have to balance what we're doing. But as we go through this, I want you to be thinking about your operation, what your objective is. You may even be somebody that didn't have any cattle. And so this talk may be lending an ear towards what you think you're going to do, and help you decide on a direction to go. So just with that in mind, we're trying to focus on this objective. So when we're strictly talking about heifers, there's several different alternatives. We realize if we have a male calf, there's very few options for a crossbred male bovine. Uh, the the main thing for all males is they go from being a bull to be turned into a steer. They enter the feedlot, and they're put on somebody's plate. There are those rare few people that think they have this anomaly of a calf, and they keep it a bull, and they decide to use it as a herd bull, or it's a bull that they couldn't get caught. And so because they couldn't catch him, he's still out there, and he's 3 years old, and he's breeding some cows, and he looks sorry as they come. But from the heifer standpoint, we can sell these animals at weaning, so straight off the cow. We of course there's some things between a weaning and yearling, but you could precondition them and sell them. You can background them a little while, but a more major decision point would be uh, selling them as a yearling. So we sell them straight off the cow as a weanling, or we sell them as a yearling, which is also a time when folks would be interested in buying those heifers to potentially breed. Because if they're 12 months old, they put a couple of months more on them, and then put a bull with them in a couple of months, and they'll have a calf, you know, a year from when they bought them. Not a marketable calf, but they'll have a calf on the ground. Alternatively, we keep those animals. We have a bred heifer. We could sell those. We could sell bred heifers, or we could even calve out those heifers and sell them as pairs. And so. That's those are the four main alternatives that we have for when we can sell these females. And so that's kind of where we're going to focus, because we are going to have a little bit of math in this. Um, just because dollar values are very important. Maybe we don't have math as much as we just have dollar values. I'll go through some of my assumptions on the math and how I arrived at some of those values, but that's where we're going. So these aren't as current as what they should be because I did not update these, but it's still it was updated like 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. This is what things were 3 weeks ago, maybe. And I didn't want to deviate from it because it's still it's not a huge difference from where we were. But just playing along here, a weanling 525 pound heifer worth $2,100, nearly, 2,142. Of course, those are down today compared to that, but uh, that's not a big deal. Just these were all in the same time period when I put these together, and we're just going to work off of that. Similarly, that yearling, 800 pound yearling at 335, there's no chance you would get that today. But at that time, 3 weeks ago, you could get 2684 and move along. So a weanling at 525, somewhere between 21 and $2,200 a year, an 800 pound yearling, nearly $2,700. And then I looked up some bred heifer values. We don't always have the best information for bred heifer values, but there were a bunch of bred heifers that were being offered for somewhere between 4 and 4,500. I did hear of some cattle. I think it was about 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, some bred heifers that were going for 5,000. But it's highly variable. Quality is very important in that aspect, and quality is important for feeder cattle, but it becomes even more important for those replacements because now they're going to affect every offspring that animal produces. But anyway, 4,000 to $4,500 is what a bred heifer was being. You could purchase them at because they were being offered for that. Uh, and then some payers, which again highly variable. 5,000 to 5,500. Um, as a really young calf with a payer. So we have all these different values, and what it comes down to is from a retention standpoint, if you wouldn't buy any of those animals on the previous slide at well, let's don't do that. Uh, Due to the price, then you should probably be selling and not retaining your animals. So if we back up and you say, well, I wouldn't buy a yearling for 2680, and you got 5 or 6 yearlings that would sell for 2680, you probably need to be selling her. Uh, Now, if you would have purchased those animals at those prices, then retaining is probably more in line with what you're trying to achieve. But one of the things that a lot of people forget is when you retain an animal, it's the same thing as purchasing it. Well, people say, "Well, I didn't purchase it. I mean, I already owned it, and I've only got this much money in it." Yeah, but when you forego a value of selling something, then at that same time you purchased that animal for that value because you could have sold it for $2,680 as an 800 pound heifer. Or if you have bred heifers that you could sell for 4,000 or 4,500, you're like, well, I wouldn't pay that much for them. Well, if you could get that much for yours, then you should sell yours because you are essentially purchasing them when you decide to retain them. I know some people are going to say, well, that's not right. I disagree. And that's fine. It doesn't bother me. You can disagree. Um, I'll still probably get good sleep tonight, regardless of if people disagree with me or not. Uh, I don't have to be agreed with. Um, so when we do think about retaining females, there are several things we need to think about. Number one, do we even have the resources available? When we make a decision to wean heifers, do we have a place to wean and precondition those cattle and background those cattle and grow those cattle to the appropriate age and weight before we expose them to a bull? Um, that generally requires labor resources. Do you have enough labor? If you're short on labor, that's more labor. May not be a lot of labor, but it's labor and you need to consider it. Do you have the feed resources? Do you have the capital resources? Do you have pasture? Do you have the hay resources? Um, I mean, I'm trying to make that decision right now myself. I've got a load of heifers that are technically sold, and there's I don't know, there's probably 100 of them, 100 and I don't no, there's probably 130 heifers total, and there's some of them that are really large that I could probably retain the bigger end and go ahead and breed them, or should I just go ahead and sell them as well? There's a lot of different decisions there. Um, so when we retain these animals, are we actually retaining them to enter our cow herd, or are we retaining those animals to sell later, or are we doing both? So, there's nothing that precludes you from doing multiple things. And when I say that, uh, I don't know. A lot of our, probably the average herd size in this state's around 25 females, but we've got people with five females to 500 to well over 500 actually. Uh, so, when we make a decision to retain heifers, they don't all have to go one direction. They don't have to all go the same route. And in saying that, uh, let's just take a 50 cow herd, you retain 10 heifers, or maybe you retain 15 heifers, and really all you need is 10 to replace what you're culling. Well, you pick your 10, and then what are you going to do with the other five? Well, I mean, you can sell them. You can do something with them. I guess you could retain them, uh, but it doesn't preclude you from selling those females. So you can do one, you can do both, and you can go either way that way. Uh, at the same time, when we are retaining heifers, I mean, do we have cows that need to be culled? Because that's going to influence how many we actually retain to meet our needs. So, if, for instance, right now, I guess this is a good example. I've got about 120 breeding females, and probably 80 or 90% of them, 80% of them, I'll just say 80%, try to be conservative, are anywhere from 2 to 5 years old. Um, so I've got a very young cow herd. Probably going to sell a bunch of them anyway, as young cows. That's probably the plan. But uh, if I was strictly knowing I was going to keep them, as long as they're producing a good calf, most of those females are not going to have a reason to be culled. Most of them aren't going to have, some type of udder issue or eye problem or abscess or whatever you want. Just think of whatever problems you can think of why you would bad dispositions. I don't have, well, I might have one or two that have bad dispositions relative to everybody else, but they're still not that bad. Uh, so when we're making these retaining considerations, we're really starting to think, well, are there cows that need to be culled? Or how many do we need to cull? Or even are the heifers that we're bringing in behind them better than these cows? So would we still, even though this cow is a fair cow, still a decent cow, are we better off uh, retaining another heifer uh, just because they're superior in some form or fashion, or we think they're superior in some form or fashion compared to the cow that we might cull? And then it comes down to this question of should heifers be purchased instead of retained from your own herd. Uh, I know that there are a lot of people that think they got the best cows, but I went to English class one time in like fourth grade. It was about probably fourth grade. I went one time. And one thing I learned about best is you can only have one. The best, it's singular. Uh, that's why they play, well, like the World Cup. Some of y'all might have watched the World Cup. And that, all of a sudden we know what the best team in the world is for soccer. Or if you watch baseball, the Atlanta Braves. I mean, that's who we root for around here is the Atlanta Braves. And they're going to have a World Series and it's going to demonstrate which team is the best. Um, so I guess I mean you can definitely have I've got the best genetics for growth, or I've got the best genetics for carcass quality, so I guess there are different categories, but at the end of the day, whatever your objective is, there's only one best cow out there. And so realize that a lot of times we can purchase really good genetics. We can purchase really good quality animals from a physical standpoint. Uh, docility standpoint, whatever it is, there's a lot of good animals that can be purchased instead of just retained out of your own herd. Now, I do recognize that those that we retain out of our own herd, we know more about them. We certainly know their dam, we know their sire in most cases. Uh, we have a little more history on them. We know their health program. But I think this is something that anybody that's selling replacement style heifers, replacement quality heifers, they'll have most of that information as well. So just FYI, I mean, there's a lot to be known there. When we are purchasing these animals, number one, you do have to have a source, somebody that's selling replacements. That doesn't always exist. They may not always be enough to go around for everybody. So, I mean, there still is that. This is just to prove the point that there is still a huge benefit to retaining your own replacements. Now, if you're the guy that's trying to get started, it's really hard to retain replacements if you don't have any heifers that you own, cows that are producing heifers. So it's going to be hard to retain. So purchasing generally is the only option. When we're thinking again about purchasing, how long has this cow been bred? I mean, how far along is she? Does she fit my breeding and calving season? Because it would, if you're a year-round caver, I don't guess it matters. But if you're a person, I mean, I have a fall and a spring calving herd, and I have defined breeding seasons, which therefore somewhat define my calving seasons. The calving season will always be a little longer than your breeding season just because of different gestation periods between cows. But I tell you, after a couple or 3 weeks of checking cows 3 times a day, I'm tired of doing it. So I keep that season has to be fairly short for me. And uh, it's very important if you're going to be purchasing something and you're going to be paying a high dollar amount, you want that animal to be calving at the same time that the rest of your cows are calving. You don't want one that's out of sync with everybody else because that just messes it all up. You may even want to know, the breed of the sire that's servicing those heifers. And that's really only important for the first calf because from then on, you're going to be making the decision on the breed of sire or the quality of sire breeding those females. But at the same time, if you're buying an Angus cross cow or a Charolais cross cow, and for some reason she was bred to a Corriente bull, I mean, I'm being very facetious here. That's far-fetched. But if it's bred to a Corriente bull, probably not what you're looking for. You would have to discount that female because the first calf you get out of her is not going to be as valuable as one that would have been crossbred to an English or continental breed that we're used to. You also probably want to know just fertility and growth characteristics of the dam and the sire of that heifer. If that information is available, it may not always be available, but you may want to know that information. So just FYI, some things to be thinking about. I know this may be boring to some, but it's pretty exciting stuff when you actually start thinking about it. And I think stretching our minds, I enjoy having to think about this stuff uh, because it really gets my mind going and sometimes a little excited about it, thinking about the different situations we have. So some more purchasing considerations, because if we're retaining our own, the average conception rate for heifers is somewhere between 85 and 93%. So let's just say we keep 10 heifers. Uh, I realize eight and a half of them cannot conceive, not nor can 9.3, but let's just say nine of them conceive. But then our pregnancy rate is generally going to be lower than our conception rate. So all of a sudden we go from nine heifers that have conceived to only eight heifers being bred. Uh, and what happens is that failure to breed increases the average cost of all the pregnant females. So we had an expense of trying to breed those two females that didn't end up with a pregnancy that would go to term. And so all of a sudden, what we realize is that pregnant heifers, we could purchase pregnant heifers for the average cost of developing our own heifers. Um, because in most situations, when people are marketing heifers, they're generally 6 months bred or a little farther along. Maybe I mean there's times when there's only 4 to 5 months bred. But by the time we get to 4, 5, 6 months bred or even longer bred, the likelihood of losing that pregnancy is a lot lower than in the early stages. So there's a lot more early stage losses of pregnancy than there are late term losses. And so that's why I say pregnant heifers could literally be purchased for the average cost of developing our own heifers. So let's put a few dollars to this. And I've kind of been using the 10 head just because 10 head's easy. If you're a big operation, I mean, there are definitely uh, economies of size and scale that could be represented here. So this cost, here I've got 3,800, nearly $3,900 to develop a heifer. Uh, Whereas if you had 100 head, that cost would probably be closer to 34, 3,500. It'd just be lower because you could end up selling open heifers for a higher value because you have a larger group and your reproduction uh, cost is going to be a little lower just because you don't have to have cleanup bulls or as many cleanup bulls, that kind of thing. But anyway, we go back here. Let's go how we get this $3,900 or 3,880. The weaned heifer that we talked about earlier at $2,142. I'm going to develop her for 11 months, which gets her to 5, 6 months bred type thing. And I've got that feed down around 1135. I guarantee you your dollar amounts are a little different than this. So if you don't like the numbers, that's fine. Not going to hurt my feelings that you say, well, my number's not that high or my number's higher, or we'll have at it. Uh, I just know that we've got to feed them every day, whether that be hay, pasture, or some other type of supplement. They've got to be fed, and there is an expense to that. A basic health program might be a little low there. I mean, value I have there largely buying in bulk, but reproductive service is really high because in this case, I assumed we tried to AI these females, and then we put a cleanup bull on them. The thing about it is, well, actually, no, I might have just used the idea or the thought that one thing that we forego a lot of times in small operations, we end up choosing a bull that's only for heifers, and we use that, and he breeds all our cows. And so we give up some growth, or we give up some birth weight, or we give up this or that or the other, so that we don't have calving difficulties with our heifers. And so my assumption here is that we actually own a bull that's specifically for heifers and not forego the additional pounds that we might gain by having a growthier bull on our cows. So there is, the idea is that there should be more revenue generated by the cows because we have a bull that can service those cows and produce uh, larger calves, whereas the heifer bull might not have the same growth characteristics. Not that you can't find uh, a really good calving geese bull with a an average birth weight that doesn't have really great growth characteristics and carcass quality. Not saying you can't find that. I'm just trying to be conservative in my numbers here. And then there's always a labor cost because if we're going to have to go in there and we're going to have to feed these animals, we've got to provide a health program. We've got to get these animals bred. There's always a labor cost. Most people that are in this meeting would say, "Well, I don't count my labor." Well, that's okay. I mean, your labor's worth something. Um, Even if it's not worth a dollar amount, you might rather see your child playing ball or your grandchild playing ball, or you may just want to be in the house taking a rest. I don't know. Uh, then there's several other costs, just some anomaly things that are normal costs that instead of detailing them all, not that important. And then there's this cost of the open heifer cost because a lot of times what happens is if we only have 10 head, we end up with these uh two open females, and now they're 1,000 pounds, and we've got all this cost in them from developing them, and we've got to spread that across everybody else. And then when we actually sell the heifers, they don't have a whole lot as much value in uh the market because they're so heavy. And what are you going what's somebody going to do with two heavy 2,000 pound, two 1,000 pound heifers that need to go to the feedlot because they wouldn't breed? And so we lose some value on some of those animals sometimes relative to what we could have got for them as 800 pound heifers ready to go into the feedlot. So that's my thought process there. Now, I will tell you, last year, you would have with open heifers, you would have made money by selling them in a lot of cases, even if they didn't get bred because the market just kept going higher and higher and higher. So the alternative of selling them as an 8 weight or something like that, or even as a weanling versus selling them because they were open, there would have been it would have lowered the total cost to heifer development from that aspect. But in most years, it's going to be a cost. So therefore, in our situation here, we're nearly $3,900 of cost. And the biggest part of that cost, of course, is the key retention of that 525 pound heifer. I mean, she makes up 55, 60% of that overall cost. Very key because you could have collected that $2,100 11 months earlier and done something with it. Um, let's proceed and we'll look at how this plays out. So I've got a diagonal here, and if you follow my cursor here, 2,142 is what we paid. That's what we could have received for our 525 pound heifer. This 2,680 is what I valued that 800 pound heifer at as a yearling. That's this on like that second slide that we showed. Again, second slide or third slide, whatever it was. A 6 month bred heifer could be purchased or sold for 4,000 to 4,500, and then a pair at 5,000 to 5,500. So what I try to do here is give this for a comparison. And in this first column, like I said, we could have received 2,142, but if we kept her and we put feed into her, all of it, and we grew her to 800 pounds, we had $2,558 in her. Now she could have been sold for 2,680, so there was money to be made from growing them from 525 pounds to 800 pound heifers. Now, see, this is important because at this point we don't even have to have made the decision to retain this female. If we could have sold her for 2,142, well, that's good money. But all of a sudden we grow them and we have 416 more dollars in her. But that $416 investment would have actually returned us a profit of $122. So, a $416 investment that essentially you got a 25% return on that money. That's pretty good return on money. There's not just a whole lot of things farming where you put in you get a 25 or 30% return. That's just not all that common. All right, moving forward, we just showed the whole budget of getting to a 6 month bred heifer at essentially $3,900. If we took that 800 pound heifer and considered her value and we purchased an 800 pound heifer, we'd have $4,002 in it versus a 6 month bred heifer that we could pay 4,000 to 4,500 for and put her on the place. So when you look at this, you would say, oh, well, I'm better off retaining my own females because I can do it for $3,900. If I had to buy an 800 pound heifer and then develop her, well, I'd have a whole 122 more dollars in her. So I shouldn't do that. And if it's going to cost me 4,000 or 4,500 to buy a 6 month bred heifer, I'm still better off just retaining my own. That's what you can see from this. Now hold on to that. I haven't explained everything yet. Uh, so based off of this at face value, that's essentially what I'm saying. But I have more information that I think might change your mind a little bit. Again, here we go and we take a pair to be 1 month old. So we go from a 6 month bred heifer to a pair that's 1 month old. So that's 4 more months down the road. Add 400, essentially $1 a day of feed to keep that female. And that's where we get to that 42.82. Similar thing here, $402 to take that 6 month bred heifer up to a pair. Just adding the $402 here. So with that, you say, well, I'm still better developing my own and getting them to pairs, because if I can have $4,200 in them, and then I could actually sell them for 5,000 or 5,500, or I could retain them, I'm better off. I've made money. That is somewhat true. But what I did not account for in any of this, and I still haven't found a good way to account for it. I guess I have to some degree, but it's always a moving target. So what I have not accounted for, if we think about this 525-pound heifer that we retained, she's 7 months of age. Let's just say you're a spring calver, you wean in the fall. We wean this heifer in the fall, and she's going to take up feed and hay resources through the winter. And then in the spring, she's going to be taking up pasture resources. So when we retain heifers and we make a decision to retain heifers and precondition those heifers and grow those heifers and breed those heifers, what we could actually do is carry more cows. If we did not retain heifers and develop our own heifers, we could physically keep more cows. So let's just take the guy that retained 10 heifers. He needed the 10 heifers. How many more cows do you think he could keep on his operation, or she? I'm sorry, I shouldn't leave the ladies out, because we've got ladies that do this as well. But this producer, if they decided, hey, I'm not going to retain 10 heifers, I'm just going to buy 10 6 month, or I expect to only get 8 breds anyway. I'll just buy the 8 bred heifers. Let's see, be well, several months down the road. Several months down the road. Essentially 13 months down the road. So I think easily that somebody could carry 4 to 5 more cows on the resources that they would be developing 10 heifers when they only needed 8 in reality. So with that thought in mind, if you have 5 more calves, and right now those calves are very valuable, extremely valuable, and I would be willing to say, even today, let's see, I'm trying to think of what my budget has for the cow carrying cost, total cost, everything included. I mean everything, not just cash costs, but everything. It's probably around $1,000 to $1,100. All right, so you carry that cow and she produces a calf and it costs you $1,100, and that calf is worth $2,000 today. $2,000. So I'm just going to make easy and call it each cow would produce $1,000 worth of profit in today's market. So you kept 5 more cows instead of developing the heifers. So now you got $5,000 more dollars to work with. So if we spread that $5,000 out across the 8 heifers that you're gonna need, essentially we'd be able to add, really, that pair, it cost you nearly $5,000 to develop that pair right here in this first column. It cost you nearly $5,000 because you could have just carried more cows and sold all the calves at weaning and then purchased back a bred heifer 12 or 13 months later. so that she would calve in the spring. Um, I hope folks followed that. I'm not sure that makes complete sense to everybody, but I hope you did because that's essentially what we're looking at in this situation. So some other alternatives that we have here, if we're not going to retain these animals, we know that all our open heifers can be sold into the feeder market. Uh, Here we are. We developed these heifers. We had these two that were open, but what we know is that small quantity of heifers will be greatly discounted. Now, if you're the guy that's got 100, you're developing 100, maybe you're developing 200, and let's say we still have that 80% pregnancy rate. Well, that leaves you a group of 20 heifers that probably are similar in size that you could sell as a group of 20. Those might bring a premium, whereas a couple, three or four or five, not going to bring a very large premium. I'm trying to think. Somebody asked me, I had a group of heifers. I don't tend to leave bulls with heifers very long. A lot of times I use a 30-day breeding season on heifers. Um, and that's because of this situation right here. What I want to achieve with heifers, and I think when I sell these heifers, when I sell heifers, I feel like this is doing my customer justice because I want to have the most fertile heifers getting bred. So a lot of times, I no longer they won't ever be in there longer than 60 days on heifers. The bulls will never be in there more than 60 days. But a lot of times I only run them for 30 to 40 days. So at most two cycles that some of them get to go through. And therefore I end up having a higher percentage of open heifers. But that's known to me that I know I'm going to do that, but I also know that I'm just going to group those with some more heifers and sell a load of feeder cattle at the same time. So, uh, in the situation where if we're the guy that only has 10 heifers and we end up with two open ones, if we take them to the stock barn to the auction market, we know they're not going to bring a huge value. And just because there's not a whole lot of people looking for a 1,000-pound heifer, and what do we group her with? Sure, we'll get her to the feedlot, but we're going to discount her when we buy her because she's not really what we're looking for. So in that case, a lot of times it may be best to try to sell, those heifers as freezer beef or something like that. Or maybe you choose that one as the one that you put in your freezer. Uh, Maybe you don't like freezer beef, so maybe that's not an alternative for you. Or maybe you find somebody that does freezer beef and you sell that 1,000-pound cow to the person that does freezer beef. I know that requires a little more effort, a little more work, but that's the way I think through that kind of thing. Um, so with that, uh, I don't want questions yet. I want to share a different screen here, and I want to look at some heifer values from last week. When we're thinking about this is medium and large, yeah, medium and large number one heifers marketed through Tennessee auction markets in 2000 or yeah, let's see, that would have been the week of today's the 19th, so we back that up. That's the 12th, 11th, 10th through the 16th, or 10th through the 15th, technically. Um, and here we're looking at this, and I want to come down here and look at these larger heifers, and we take six 1,100-pound heifers at 240.
Andrew, we're not seeing your screen.
Okay. Oh, you're okay. Wait a second. Sorry. Let's change. Wait a second. I apologize. we will share this screen. Now, do you see the correct one now? There we go. I guess I just flipped it over on mine and didn't move it to y'all's. Sorry about that. So retract all those statements and let's go. Let's start again. No, we don't have to start again, but uh, I do want to look down here if I can get this thing to scroll down. I'm about to get ticked off at it. All right, but I think you can see what I need to show now. Uh, so down here we're looking at 1,109 pound heifers, six of them at 2240 a hundredweight. So trying to do some simple math, that comes out to 2640 or so, $2,640 for an 1,100 pound heifer. I'm not saying go buy these. I'm not saying my point is when you end up with, or you can back up to these 915s. Now they fit more people. These 915s do. They can still go in the feedlot and do all right, and they're going to be right at $2,700. But you see how that 915 heifer is actually more valuable than the 1,100 pound heifer. And a lot of the times, by the time we know if we have a bred heifer or don't have a bred heifer, they're not 915 pounds, they're 1,000 or 1,100 pounds. And this is where I know we're here talking about heifers, but something that I think is extremely valuable on any operation is to use some type of pregnancy detection that is not waiting until the cow is supposed to calve. I mean, we all use pregnancy detection. Most of us just happen to wait until, oh, well, the bull was with her for so and so and so and so, and she's supposed to calve on, oh, sometime between February 1st and April 15th. So uh, we'll just wait until then. I don't encourage that. I think one of the most valuable tools we have, one of the best dollars you can spend is pregnancy evaluation following the breeding season. And this price right here for these heifers proves that. It proves that because, for instance, I just pulled. Now this is just some cows. I preg checked 53 cows. Had the vet come and preg check 53 cows 2 weeks ago yesterday. 2 weeks ago yesterday. Or no, was it last week? My weeks are running together. May have been last week. So a week ago yesterday. And we had a few open cows, and immediately I can sell those cows. Uh, I sold those that didn't have calves on them, so I had a couple of heifers that did not breed, so I went ahead and sold those immediately. I had a few that still have 4 to 5 month old calves on them. I could have weaned those calves that day. I decided to keep the cows, and I'm going to wean the calf at about 7 months of age. But those cows that are open, that are still open, they'll go as soon as those calves are weaned. And so therefore, I won't be feeding some cows or heifers that are open through the winter, and that charge me $200. It cost me $200 a head to get them through the winter. I'm not gonna. What I did is I essentially paid about $5 a head to have a pregnancy evaluation done. And if I find at that cost, if I just find one open female, it paid for itself to have that veterinarian come out and do that work. I hope that makes sense in what I'm saying. So I think that's one of the best tools, especially with heifers, that we can use. Now, cows, I mean, they still have that expense. The thing is, as a heifer, there's two things to benefit from. We don't have the expense of carrying that animal more days and her eating grass or eating feed and uh, requiring resources from us that are not ever going to be returned with a calf. But alternatively, the second side of that is if we go ahead and move her at a little bit lighter weight, she probably has a higher value at a 915, a 930, even 870 pounds than she does because we carried her for 9 more months or 7 or 8 more months, and she gained weight that whole time, and now she's 1,100 pound cow, uh, just a heifer. She's just an 1,100 pound heifer. So we gained 2 ways from that. So I think there's some value in thinking through that and how that might play into what you're doing. If you don't currently use some type of pregnancy evaluation, you say, well, we don't have a vet. We couldn't get a vet out here. Well, there are blood tests that are fairly inexpensive, maybe $7 a head. It's worth getting the materials, getting those cows up, bleeding the tail head, sending that in a day or two, you have the results and you move on and you can make a good culling and marketing decisions for the animals that are open. And even if they are bred, there, you might have so many heifers or something that you're like, well, I can't keep this many heifers. I need to sell some of these as bred heifers. That also gives you that information on who's bred and who's not and where we can go with some of those animals. I think one more thing I was going to try to do here. I don't remember. I think I looked at this, but we may not have. Don't remember if there were any heifers that sold through the weekly auction market. Yeah, there were a few, very, very few. So you can see here last week, essentially a 2-year-old heifer, two head, they sold for $4,300. Come down 2 to 4 months, or in second trimester, 2 to 4 year olds, it says average nearly $4,300. Evidently, I would say this one that's in her third trimester, either that market didn't have a whole lot of participation or she might have been a little bit lower quality, but $3,700. So these are medium and large number one animals, good, fairly good quality animals. Now you can get down in here into some that are lower quality for sure. But even cow-calf pairs. Not that there's a whole lot of information here, but two head that less than 150 pounds, $4,800. I'm going to say this one right here. This is greater than 5 years old. That's why she didn't bring very much. But a heifer here at $4,800. Again, some heifers would be in this group right down here with 150 to 300 pound calves, $4,800. Some as high as 4,950. So those all kind of fit where I was with my prices. And in reality, most of the time, these type of animals they command a higher value at a special sale where that's where everybody's looking for bred heifers or cow calf pairs or something like that. So with that, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions because I want that's probably the bigger part of what I hope, Matt. I hope that covered some things that were really important to people because I that's the way I look at things. Those are what I look at, and that's how I make decisions. And fortunately, it has been profitable for me to act in that manner. So that's why I presented that way. But I would like to open it up for questions because there's probably several of y'all that have some specific questions. Uh, and so I'd rather take more time. Like to take time doing that as opposed to try to present you more things that you're like that. That's not the way I'm looking at it.
I think that's perfect. I'll get started that way. Um, you can get me going, and then hopefully others will follow. So, um, I'll ask the question that probably everybody does, and really it's just going to be your thoughts and opinions. But what role do you play, or do you put into the fact is if I retain this effort, can I get the value out of that calf where the market's at today? Do you predict the market going to be at in 2 years when you are able to pull a calf off that heifer? Does that play a role in your retaining it all, or is that more based on what you presented earlier?
Okay, no, so I got in trouble a few weeks ago at a meeting because what you were asking, actually, there was a county agent that asked that same similar type question, and I'm going to lead you into it. And knowing this agent very well, I knew I could say this to this county agent, but one of the participants was a little offended. And I said, that's a stupid. Here was his question. How long is it going to take to pay off this cow? Which is somewhat similar to what you're asking, correct? How many years is it going to take to pay off this retained heifer that I'm going to breed? And I say, that is a stupid question. And I shouldn't have said it that way. So I
Well,
shouldn't.
I'm glad I asked it.
No, 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 no. It is. I'm glad that question gets asked
Yep.
because I want to change people's way of thinking on that
Yep.
question. And here's why. So if we back up, as this market was going higher and higher and higher, you could have bred some heifers and turned around and sold her with her first calf, or you could have bought some heifers that were fixing to calve, turn around and sell that heifer right after she calved, and more than likely made more money than what you paid for her. So to answer that question, it's like I never even had to sell a calf as a calf itself. I literally could make money by purchasing a bred heifer, selling it as a cow calf pair, and I'd be profitable and probably make $500 or $600. And so when we get in the mindset of we only have one thing we can do, and that's really where that question comes from. As a cow calf producer, we think, well, we're going to retain them, or we're going to buy them, and we're going to keep them till they're 12 years old. That's what we're going to do. And I want to get people away from that mode of thought. Not that you can't do that, but don't think that way. It's how do I maximize the value of this animal? And sometimes that's within 3 or 4 years. And that's why I'm saying there's a good chance I'm going to sell a bunch of 2 to 4 year old females this year because I think they're probably topped out on their value. Sure, I could do the calves, but I can probably buy back something cheaper and develop them and do something. So I think we should from a marketing standpoint, we should always keep in mind that a cow is always tradable. Uh, there's a guy that I've heard say this, and I'm not necessarily his biggest fan, but I do agree with his statement in that uh, cattle are not meant to be owned; they're meant to be traded. So I'm not saying you go out and he doesn't, and I don't think he means this either. He doesn't mean just trade, 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 trade. No, no, no. When something is when somebody wants something more than what it's really worth, sell it. They're overvaluing it, sell it. But at the same time, there's going to be something that's undervalued in the market. Go own that one. So get rid of the one that's overvalued, buy the one that's undervalued, and do something to increase its value. I think that answers the question.
It's a good answer. I appreciate it. You've got a few in chat.
Okay, let me look at those. Okay. Can we use these same principles for determining whether to retain and develop bulls? Use these same principles for determining. I think that's a little bit different of a decision, but I think the same principles, yes, the same principles can be used in determining whether to retain and develop bulls. Yes, the answer is yes, just to answer the question straight. But how you think through that process will be different. So, from that standpoint, I would assume that you're thinking from a seed stock position and not a commercial cattle position because we don't really need to retain very many, you don't need a whole lot of bulls to service cows. One every 30 cows or something. A mature bull, one every 25, one every 30, one every 35. You pick whatever your ratio is. So, from a seed stock perspective, what you're trying to do is really determine the demand for bulls 2 years down the road. Or, well, no, now, I don't know, Matt, you remember when everybody used to sell 2 year old bulls and now we sell 15-month-old bulls? We don't actually develop bulls as much anymore. We just get them to the 15-month age and we sell them, which I think can be detrimental, but that also takes the risk off of the seed stock producer. There's a lot can happen from month 15, 16 to 2 years old. Um, so from that standpoint, you're trying to determine what the demand for bulls is going to be when they're 15, 16, 17 months of age. And the problem with them is there's only so many cows to service. Whereas if we have more heifers, we just need a bull. We can generally add heifers and continue to produce more calves. If a bull's not needed, he's just not needed. So I hate to that kind of skirts around the question, Robert, but I apologize. But that's is you can use the same principles. It's just a different thought process that has to go into those principles. If I retain my heifers and use artificial insemination, uh, I'm glad you actually spelled that out, Isaac, because now AI has a bunch of different meanings, right? Uh, but if I use artificial insemination, what is the recommended minimum weight they should reach before breeding? Oh, goodness. Well, what type of cattle are we talking about? If you got some Dexters, their mature weight may only be 850 to 900 pounds. Um, so what? Let me change your question a little bit. So Isaac, I'm going to say what we generally shoot for is that we want cows to be calving at 2 years of age. We want a heifer to be having her first calf at 2 years of age. So when we think about that, if she was born let's say she was born in March of 2026, you're going to wean her this fall at 7 months of age. So that would be Octoberish / early November. Then she's going to be grown until next May or so, May or June. You're gonna AI her on the front end of your breeding season, probably a month before your typical breeding season for your cow herd. And she's going to be hopefully calving in February or March of 28. So instead of focusing on weights, now weight is important. There is some research that would support, the old research would say 65% of their mature weight is where you want them when you go to breed them. Some of the newer research, because what we have done with some of our genetics is these heifers are maturing earlier. Uh, and because of that, we don't have to have them at 65% of their mature weight. 55% of their mature weight, a lot of times, is sufficient to get them bred. The main thing is that you want them at a good body condition and a large enough weight that when they're going to calve at 2 months of age, that they don't have difficulties. Because let's be honest, I don't even like having to pull calves. I mean, after you've put your hand in enough heifers and put chains on enough feet or tried to reposition a head, uh, and you're doing that and it's dark, this. So I generally check cows 3 times a day when they're calving. And that last check of the day, if I have a cow that's even questionable that she may or may have trouble and I can tell she's fixing to calve, I just go ahead and take her to the barn and I assist it because I don't want to wait until dark. So, that's where we would be on that, trying to make sure that they're 55 to 65% of their mature weight at time of breeding. But the key is that they're calving at 2 years of age. And the bigger issue is getting them rebred to calve again at 3 years of age. That's the bigger challenge than calving at 2 years of age.
Andrew, the question for the economics guy, it's been you were talking about hay a little bit earlier this year. Is it pretty much universally we have lower quality hay this year? We're in abundance, but we have a lot of lower quality hay, very mature hay. So going into the fall, any considerations for heifers that may be late gestation? You're looking at potentially if you're trying to keep them up, increase feed costs, trying to make up the difference in that hay. Any role that's going to play for you?
Yes, so there will be. So something that I'll focus on that I did a poor job of last year. I'm going to say because last year's hay was pretty poor quality for me, and like you said, this year there's been a lot of late cut hay because it just kept raining this, that, or the other. Get it? I'm with you. Or actually, there's people that they just had never cut the first hay cutting off of some because all the others been growing. They just keep cutting it, but I still got to cut the. So yes, there's going to be some low quality hay. I would suggest that you choose your high quality hay to feed at specific times based off of that gestation. But the thing that I'm going to be focusing on is making sure I've got energy in the ration. So I pull cows to the front of a place in the fall because I have a fall calving herd. And I'll tell you spring versus fall because I think there are some differences. Uh, so what I do with the fall calving herd is they get pulled to the front of a place, and after they've finished grazing some stockpiled forages, they go on hay. But then I supplement with a liquid feed that's high in energy. I'm not focused on protein. Don't I'm not paying for protein. That's not what I need for these cows. These cows need energy. Typically, I mean, sure sure there might be a need for a little additional protein, might be, but in most instances, the need is for additional energy. So I use a liquid feed that this is what I do. The cows will literally when the hay quality is poor, they'll eat more of it, and when the hay quality is really good, they eat a lot less of it. They just have a lower demand for it because they're getting what they need. Because they would much rather eat forage than this liquid feed. That's just how that works. And so I know I'm going to be supplementing this fall with that liquid feed because I need more energy in my cows' diets. Fast forward to the spring calving herd. Now, what I generally do, I actually put them just prior to calving, 30 days prior to calving. I actually put mine on some type of winter annual forage that has been drilled. All right, that's what I do. And the reason for that is because if they've got you can kind of get those even heifers. I mean, it doesn't matter cows, heifers, either one through the winter, even though they got a calf growing inside of them. You can put some fairly low quality hay. I'm not talking about poor quality hay. I'm just talking about marginal hay, and they will do all right on it, and they'll maintain body condition. But the one thing you can't afford for them to do is lose body condition. And so, uh, I would prefer to use lower quality hay on the front end because most people will have some high quality hay. And so if you don't have the ability to drill some forwards that you can turn them in a month before, I would definitely save my high quality hay for those spring calving cows for about a month prior to when they're going to start calving. And then I would hit them with that high quality hay, that higher quality hay, that because that's going to be when their nutrient demands start to increase. And if you can do that, generally that leads you right into spring forage growth. And for most spring calving herds, our spring forage growth is adequate to to keep the cow's body condition at a 5 and to produce high enough quality milk that we can proceed. So there if you have to supplement, I would go ahead, especially when calf prices are extremely high. It's it's more lucrative, or from an economic perspective, you can afford to pay to put supplement in them, mainly because you need them to rebreed.
Well, let me go a different direction as we look at the market outlook. So, you hear lots of things about opening up borders where we're starting bringing in more cattle and kind of looking at cow inventory and the prices of our cull cows. And, the information you provided was really helpful in being able to make decisions. But we're still going to have some producers that look at, okay, well, I got high cull cow prices, so let's cull a little bit early and I'll retain a heifer because I need to replace something but only because I'm selling that cull cow because of high prices. So is where we kind of where are you kind of looking at on the retention of some of these cull cows, or are we going to continue to liquidate at pretty high rates?
The cold cow price is still really strong. It has faltered a couple of the past couple of weeks. Um, but they're still really strong. And I can't fault anybody for selling some coil cows. If you got some 5 to 6 month old calves and you're like, I know I'm gonna get rid of that cow, there's nothing wrong with going out there and pulling that cow off of that pasture right now and selling her while coil cow prices are still high. And leave that calf. That calf is now weaned. He's going to stay with the rest of the cow herd and his calf mates, and so he will be stressed. He or she will be stressed for a little while, but it won't be that bad because they're still out there with cows, and they may even learn to try to nurse some other cows during that time period. Uh, so that is one thing that some people should look at. We are going to maintain. I mean, up to this point, there is still a large portion of this country that's in drought. I know we have had rainfall for the first time in a lot of years. But as we said, it's starting to get a little dry now. We've had 3 consecutive falls where we've had drought. We've had drought the last 3 falls. That's the reason why we have not retained any heifers in this state. Some people say, oh, it's because we got, encroachment of houses. Well, people got to have a place to live, and Williamson County knows it just as well as anybody that people got to have a place to live. Um, Unfortunately, it's in your county. I hate it for you. I really do. I'm not too far from you. Um, but but at the same time, what's really kept us from retaining any heifers? Sure, we lose land. I understand that it's going to do it, but more or less, it's been that drought. And if we have a drought this late summer and into this fall, there will be people that say, I'm just not going to keep those heifers. I'm going to cull some cows and sell the heifers because we may end up running low on forage this winter. But there are large portions of cattle producing country right now that have been in drought all summer, and there's no chance they're retaining heifers. So we have an opportunity to take advantage of good rainfall this year and maybe, still capitalize on some strong calf prices the next 2 to 3 years. Now, here's the thing. We were selling some 5 weight steers for $2,600. Well, even if we, so, take whatever that is. Um, let's go from $4.50 a hundredweight to $3 a hundredweight. Even if you got a 525 pound steer at $3 a pound, we're talking about $1,575 a head. If you're not making, that's still a really good value. That is an extra. It's not. You say, well, that's down. That's damn. That's terrible because we were getting 2,500. You're right. It's down $1,000 if that's what happens. But at the same time, you should still be making money hand over fist at that rate. You should still be making $400 or $500 a head, which is historically that's still extremely high. So I think that's where we sit on that.
Perfect. Well, you've got a question there, and then
Let's
after
see.
that, unless nobody else has any questions, we'll get towards wrapping it up.
I've got 2 heifers currently. They're 4 and 4.5 years. Have a bull with smaller calving weight lined up for December through January. If either of them has a hard time or loses the calf, should I freezer beef them or try to breed them again and sell them as bred? Are they actually heifers? And they're 4 and 4.5 years old? Have they never had a bull with them? Uh,
Yes.
okay, so they're actually 4 and 4. Okay. Well, if they were truly like 2-year-old heifers or even 3-year-old heifers, I would say that a freezer beef would not be a terrible thing. I know a lot of people say, oh, well, they're going to hard bone. They're going to hard bone. That's not always true. That's not always true. So you can dismiss that. At the age they are, I think, I mean, I don't know that they're just going to be really old for freezer beef typically. Um, and try to breed them again and sell them as bred. Ooh, that's a really tough question, James.
They're probably just cold cows.
That's more than likely that's what they are. Uh, Yeah, more than likely they're just going to be really fat cull cows, unfortunately. I'm not saying you can't do the others, but they wouldn't, most people probably wouldn't want them. No, you don't want to see that last slide. That was supposed to be, yeah, can we pull the no, you don't want to see that last slide because that last slide was supposed to be hidden. So I'm going to keep it hidden.
All right. Well, unless anybody else has anything, I can't thank you enough for tonight. Great outlook, great perspective. Um, I know you're always asked to be a wizard and a seer of all, but I think
We've always got a crystal ball. We've got a
it
crystal
is, but
ball.
it gives us something to go off of versus just hoping and praying and guessing what it is. And so I also want to make mention is that is the crash coming. I want to make mention that Dr. Griffith does a weekly livestock comments. It's a great thing. I will send that out, the link so you can get on his newsletter for that. But he does a weekly comments on Friday. And there's also a crop one as well. But it's a great thing to get a great perspective, and just kind of keep in touch with what the markets are doing. So thank you for tonight. We truly appreciate it. And we hope everybody has a great night.
Thank y'all for having me. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
See you, Matt.